Can Michael Harris come back and spark this team? Can anything help this team, or have they just simply given up? And what does this season mean for the offseason? Are there big changes that need to happen? I'll answer those questions and many more on today's episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I am your host, Jake Mastriani. You can follow me on social media at ShortstopBall. Follow the podcast at LockedOn_Braves. Subscribe to us on YouTube if you're new. Hit that thumbs up button so others can find us. Leave me a comment down below, especially if you're an everydayer. Let me know. And if you're listening on the audio version, please leave me a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Just a few of the ways that you can help support us here at Locked On Braves. And thank you so much for making this your first listen of each and every day. This is our mailbag episode. I have almost 50 questions, most I think I've ever gotten, that I'll try to answer on today's episode. A wide range of questions, but several of them around Michael Harris and Ozzy's return. Has this team given up? What does the offseason look like now? Do big changes need to be made? I'll try to get to all of those on today's podcast. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Well, let's jump into it because, like I said, almost 50 questions, 49 exactly, that were submitted. And the way you do this is I send out a post from LockedOn_Braves on X. You respond to that post with your question to be answered on our episodes. I'm going to run through these, try to get to all of them if I can. A lot of these are duplicates, so I'll move quickly through some of those. For PF Danny says, Jake, do you think the return of MH2 and Ozzy is truly enough to turn this team around given the performance as of late? Are we at the point of change in the narrative from top wildcard spot to hopefully a wildcard spot in general? I do think the narrative has certainly changed in that regard to, this team's going to get in the postseason. It's just, can they hang on to the top postseason or top wildcard spot to, can this team now get into the postseason? I think that narrative has certainly changed with this team and their performance as of late. The question here, and a question that many of you asked, can Michael Harris spark this team? We'll talk about Ozzy briefly, but that's a month away. Best case scenario, things could look very differently a month from now. But Michael Harris is somebody who could be returning this week. And I do think it's going to help a lot in many different ways. And I know Michael Harris wasn't hitting great. He was having a down season, like many Braves players, like many players around Major League Baseball. His offense was down, especially at the beginning of the year. But I do think you bring back a Michael Harris and you immediately put him back in center field where he is a Gold Glove defender. And look, Jarred Kelenic helped this team in a really tough spot. When Ronald went down, Jarred Kelenic went to the top of the order and he really helped out and did some good things. But we're way past that now. It's been a rough stretch for Jarred Kelenic. And I think maybe playing center field has been part of that. It's a much more demanding position defensively, and he looks great there early on. Like they weren't losing a thing defensively in center field, but you've seen over the past week or so, especially as the offense has regressed, it seems to also be affecting him in the field. So you get Michael Harris back. I think that also could potentially help Jarred Kelenic, and we got questions on Kelenic here too. And you get, again, a guy like Michael Harris back, who I still think is a really good and talented player despite his struggles early on, and he brings some of that speed element, although I do worry with it being a hamstring injury, how much will he actually run? And it's not just in terms of stolen bases, but being that guy who can take the extra base, a guy that can score from first on a ball in the gap, just something this lineup is very much lacking. So I got a lot of questions, so I'm going to move along here, but I do think getting Michael Harris back could help spark this team in a variety of ways. Julie Craig, I keep hearing the farm system is so bad, but why? Also, at what point or even how would you fix it? So you fix it through drafting development, obviously, is the easy answer there. You got to do a great job of identifying these players, getting them in here, and then developing them. I think the Braves have done a fantastic job of that. The reason you hear the farm system is so bad is because, well, the Braves shoot these prospects through the system. They don't have time to really garner any huge prospect status. You look at an AJ Smith-Shawver and a Hurston Waldrop, who both still rank as prospects and are, two of their top 100 guys. You even look at somebody who Nacho Alvarez, and sometimes these guys aren't ready. In the case of Nacho Alvarez, who was, pushing top 100 status, you bring him up, he struggles at the big league level, and that takes some of the shine off of that prospect status. You look at a Spencer Schwellenbach. I never thought he would even pitch in the big leagues this year. If that wasn't the case, and he's still dominating down in the minor league levels and the Braves don't need him, he's probably a top 100 guy. And the other reason for that is just because the international signing restrictions they had for so long, they're now getting those players in, a Luis Guanipa, Jose Perdomo, a John Gill, Jeremy Reyes, Didier Fuentes. You're seeing all these international prospects. They're still very young, and so they're not on a lot of national radars, but they're guys who are coming. So the farm system is much better than the national media outlets would lead you to believe. Our theme to life, more of an observation, but Braves are 0-2 since Snit showed some fire and got thrown out of a game. Question, do you think Ozzie and MH coming back will actually rejuvenate this lineup and create some sort of spark this team needs? So, yeah, I think we can put to bed the fact that a manager showing fire and getting thrown out really leads to much success, even though Riley did hit a home run after it happened. But look, I like seeing it. As I said, it was my number one complaint of Brian Snitker this year. He just doesn't seem to have much of that fire. You got to see a little bit of it, which is great. I think that's more for the fans. Players maybe get, a little bit of a boost out of it, but it doesn't lead to wins. There's just never been any kind of correlation to that. But getting good players back certainly can lead to wins. And I think getting Michael Harris back for the reasons I just mentioned, again, hopefully getting Ozzie back early in September, I think can help this team tremendously. So, yes, I think getting those players back could certainly spark this team. Hayden Harris, I'm wanting a younger manager. What are your thoughts on Mark DeRosa filling that role? DeRosa is a name that's been thrown around a lot. I know he did some job interviews, I think last offseason for some jobs and was in the running for some of those. He coached the USA team in the World Baseball Classic. Getting younger, I don't think necessarily means too much. You look at the last three World Series managers, it's Dusty Baker, it's Bruce Bochy, it's Brian Snitker. So I don't know that you just have to get younger, that's going to lead to a ton of success. I do like DeRosa. I think he's, you watch his breakdowns on MLB Network, certainly seems like a guy who's very in tune with the game and the game that it is today. So I wouldn't dismiss that. I think there's another question about managers. There's a lot of questions in here. Some of them about managers. I think the Braves would probably look within. Might not love it, but I think Walt Weiss would certainly be a candidate. But DeRosa would be in there, I think, if the Braves managerial spot did open up. John Anderson, 2 questions. First one, have the Braves given up on Murphy or is something else going on? 2, does this season impact your thinking about the long-term success of this team, given the number of players who are on long-term contracts like Acuna, Riley, Harris, Murphy, Olsen, Strider? The Murphy question is probably a bigger one. I'm probably going to have to do an entire podcast on the Sean Murphy trade and situation. Outside perspective, as a fan and just seeing how they treat Sean Murphy, it feels like they've given up on him. And some of you may believe that's justified. I don't think that it is. I think that it's a guy it's been injured, and you can say that, maybe he's a little bit injury plagued. The second half of last year was banged up. The first half of this year, banged up. I just don't feel like the guy, when the only time in a Braves uniform that he has got an extended run as an everyday catcher, catching 70% of the games, he was the best catcher in baseball. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. You go back to the first half last year when Travis d'Arnaud was injured and Sean Murphy was catching 70% of the time, he was the best catcher in baseball. And, he's been banged up and injured since then. And this year coming back. And look, TDA deserves at-bats. He's been one of the better hitters, and you need all the offense that you can get. He deserves at-bats. But just the outside optics of it, it looks like the Braves now view Sean Murphy as a backup. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem in my mind, just because of what you gave up in that trade and William Contreras, and then the contract that you signed Sean Murphy to. And now all of a sudden in year 2 of this deal, again, from an outside perspective, when you're seeing Sean Murphy bat behind an Adam Duvall, it's telling me you don't have a lot of faith in Sean Murphy. The second question here from John Anderson, what do you think about the long-term success of this team? I'm not worried about the long-term success of this team or these contracts. A little worried about Acuna, but just because 2 ACL knee surgeries, that's pretty big. Riley's going to be fine. I think Olsen's going to be fine. I know that's hard to say right now. I still like Sean Murphy. I like Michael Harris. I like Spencer Strider. I like all these guys. Just got to get them healthy. I mean, look at all the names you just mentioned. Murphy's missed 2 months. Harris has missed 2 months. Riley's missed 2 weeks. Acuna's missed most of the season. Strider's missed all of the season. Olsen's the only one that's been healthy throughout, and it's been a rough season for him, certainly. It's a lot of bad luck. I hate to really chalk it all up to injuries, but all those guys you just mentioned, some of them either missed most of the year or good chunks of it. And it's just really hard to overcome that. Got a lot more questions to get to, including what the offseason looks like for this team. Do there need to be big changes? Do they need to try to trade some of these contracts and switch things up offensively? We'll discuss all of that here next. You at the ballpark this summer, what is your favorite cold treat to go for to try to get that hydration, that cool feeling? Obviously, not being very healthy conscious, I like to go for that soft serve ice cream. But when you're taking in America's pastime, don't forget to hydrate with Liquid IV's Popsicle Firecracker flavor, a surefire summer hit. Get hydrated with electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients from the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. Just tear, pour, live more. 1 stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. Powered by LIV Hydroscience, an optimized ratio of electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients that turn ordinary water into extraordinary hydration. 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, 8 essential vitamins and nutrients, always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. No more thirsty summers when you indulge in hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code MLB at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what the Atlanta Braves need more of, but it's also what brings home the winning trophy, where you keep your ride or die alive. And you can do that at eBay Motors, where they have everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. They have over 122 million parts for your #1 ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you know what it is. You're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, thank you for making Locked On Braves your first listen of each and every day. Make sure you make Locked On MLB your second listen. Solely brings you all the action with laughter, comedy, everything that you want in a baseball podcast. He's got it there for you at Locked On MLB. Let's jump back into these questions. I have a lot more to get to. Next one from Cavs Buckeyes. If things don't turn around, how will the vibes be this offseason? Say they get the 3rd wild card spot, bow out in the wild card series or divisional round quietly. Since the World Series winner vibes have been great, even with the early exits. With this season and Acuna and Strider hurt, will the Braves fan fest be less festive? I mean, I could see that. I could see off this season and just the guys having regression, especially if they miss the postseason. I think if you get to the postseason with this team and you bow out, I think you then have the excuse, we had so many injuries, and it's a legitimate excuse. We had so many injuries, we get healthy, we can bounce back next year. You miss the postseason entirely and just really don't show any fight down the stretch, then I'd be a little bit more worried about things going into the offseason and how the vibes are. But I think just getting to the postseason with all the injuries you've had to endure, this team hopefully showing some fight down the stretch, I think could still keep those good vibes going into the offseason, knowing you get Strider back next year, you get Acuna back. Knock on wood, you have to be healthier next year than you were this year. I think you can get those vibes back to this team. Emmanuel, will Money Mike have one of his signature second-half runs, and will his comeback be enough to boost the Braves' morale? Talked about that already. I certainly think that is the case, that he can do that, because I think it's going to help in so many ways. Putting Jared Kelly back into his more natural defensive position, taking off that pressure of playing center field, I think could help him. Jackson Baswell, I've been waiting for this big comeback that Braves seemingly have every year. Do you think if having one of those big comebacks will get us back on track? I do. This is what I have been saying, and it hasn't happened. I'm still looking for that game. Maybe you count that one against the Marlins, but that wasn't a game where you had to come back from a ton of runs. Your pitching gave up 6-7 runs, and you came back and won, 8-7, 9-7, whatever. We haven't had that game. You almost had it in that series against Oakland. We just have not had that game where pitching staff just doesn't have it. And I'm not talking about Thursday. That's not something your offense can come back from. But I'm just talking about a game where your pitching clearly doesn't have it. You give up 6 or 7 runs, and the offense just battles back and wins that game. It's what I talked about on the postcast the other day. I'm looking for a game that the offense clearly wins it. Pitching doesn't have it, but the offense just picks things up and wins it. We have not seen that yet. And I want to see that, and I think that could do a lot to boost the morale of this team, knowing that they have that in them, that if the pitching just doesn't have it, and that's been the case here a lot lately, that this offense has enough to come back and win you that game. I just don't have that feeling. And I got to imagine the Braves clubhouse doesn't have that feeling either. So just being able to do that once, I think could do a lot for this team. Leland says, I get the feeling no one knows what to do right this season. Am I correct? Do you have any thoughts or suggestions from your perspective? I would love to hear them. Thanks for your feedback and honesty. We need to hear real impressions, not platitude. Thanks. I do get the feeling nobody knows how to fix this team. I've looked at all the numbers. I hear it from the manager. You hear Brian Snicker himself said, I don't know. I can't figure this out, which doesn't bode well. You heard the players too. I mean, no. And again, injuries always have to be mentioned in this, but it's just, how do you fix this team right now? And it's just like, nobody has the right answers. Everybody believes they do. I'm sure there's plenty of you on here who believe you do. But if it were that easy, this team would have done it. This team would have figured it out and done it already. But it's just, every time you think they have something figured out and things going their way, either somebody gets injured or you see somebody regress, and it's just one thing after another this year. Hayden Harris, how much should our expectations have shifted for this team after all the injuries? I'm not sure we've discussed that enough. And you're probably right. I don't think we've discussed it enough to the fact where, we've mentioned several times the Braves have lost Spencer Strider. They've lost Ronald Acuna Jr. for the year. I still think expectations should have shifted when those injuries happen. You lose the best pitcher in baseball, the best position player in baseball. Your expectations at that point have to shift to where, but I think they should shift to where, okay, this is no longer a team that can win 100 games and run away with the division, to, okay, this is still a talented enough team that can compete for the division. Okay, then you lose an Ozzie Albies for 2 months. You lose a Michael Harris for 2 months. Then maybe the conversation at that point should shift to, okay, this is no longer a team that is going to push for 100 games. It's no longer a team that can compete really for the division. This is a team that needs to push for a wild card and getting that top wild card spot. And I still think, even with the injuries offensively, that this team is still talented enough, especially with the pitching staff that it has had. And I know it's been rough lately. It's this team that is still talented enough to separate themselves from the rest of the wild card pack. Again, may not be a team that competes for the division unless the Phillies just completely fall flat on their face. But I still think I think expectations should still be with, a Marcell Ozuna, an Austin Riley, a Matt Olson, a Sean Murphy, a Travis d'Arnaud. I still think expectations should be, this is a team that can separate itself from the other wild card contenders. And especially once you get, hopefully, Michael Harris back, then I think that's definitely the case. But that's not proven to be true. This is proven to be a team that is behind those guys. I mean, you've lost to those teams. You've fallen behind them, and that's not proven to be the case. But I think expectations should be, okay, this is still a easy postseason team that should be holding on to that top wild card spot. I think those should be your expectations, even with the injuries. Julie Craig, do you think the strategy of giving half the team long-term contracts has hurt the Braves? If they are performing, it looks like a good move. However, if they don't, then you are stuck with what you have. You can't go out and trade for anyone. I think it's a valid point. I still would do those moves. And it's not like those contracts are untradeable. If you wanted to trade Austin Riley, which they won't do, shouldn't do, you can trade that contract. I even think if you wanted to move Sean Murphy, you could trade that contract. Maybe we talk about that this offseason. Michael Harris is an easy contract to move. Spencer Strider is an easy contract to move. So obviously Acuna, Albies, these are easy contracts to move. The only one that would be tough to move would maybe be Matt Olson and Sean Murphy. Those are probably the two toughest contracts to move at this point. But it's not like the contracts they've signed are killing them. Because like I said, you could move those if you wanted to. If you wanted to change up strategy, you could do that. But I still think it's the right decision to lock up these players, get them on team-friendly deals, and still just build around this core. Scott McIntyre, when Ozzie comes back from his left wrist fracture, do you think it would help him to bat right-handed only at least till the end of the year? I think it's something he should consider. He's done it in the past before when he's had some hand-wrist injuries. So I think it's certainly something that he should consider. I don't think he will. Also just depends on how that wrist feels. And I'll be honest, off the top of my head, you said it was a left wrist fracture. So that certainly, helps things. So that's going to be your top hand from the swinging from the left-handed side of things. But I think it's something that he should certainly consider. All right, sorry, I got to move through these a little bit quicker. Rob P says, have the players just given up on the season at this point? No, they have not. It may look like it. It's hard to look real excited about the way things are going when you're playing so poorly. I can promise you the players have not given up. They're frustrated. They want to win as much as you want them to win. Colton Chalker, watching the Braves play and looking at shots at the dugout, it's almost like they have given up. And it seems like this team is just wanting something to happen for them. I love this team, always have, which makes this season even worse. So what is it going to take? It's going to take 2 weeks of extended good baseball. If this Braves team can just they can play 500 baseball the rest of the year, but there has to be a 2-week stretch in this where they play above what they've been playing here lately. They have to go on a long stretch. Maybe this West Coast trip is that. You're playing some teams that you should be able to beat, but they haven't beaten those teams. And again, I go back to my previous comment. It's hard to look excited, energetic when you're playing horribly. And you're right. You can't just sit back and wait on something to go your way. You have to create your own luck. And they just haven't been able to do that. They haven't been able to get out of their own way. Dustin Mounts, obviously coming into the season, no one could have seen all the injuries and massive regression coming from everyone. What offseason changes to the roster would you make, if any, with players signed beyond this year or coaches? This kind of goes back to the question asked a minute ago by Julie. What do you do with all these? If you really did want to change things up, you're going to have to trade away some contracts. You're going to have to trade away a Sean Murphy. You're going to have to trade away, a Michael Harris. You're going to have to do some drastic things. I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to keep all these guys, hope that they're healthier next year and hope that they bounce back from some poor seasons. From I know nobody wants to hear it, but it's a year in baseball where offense has been down. Again, especially early in the season, offense was down historically. And so, again, I don't see them changing too much. You can see them, maybe changing on the edges a little bit, but I think you're going to stick with all these guys that you've signed and hope that it's just a more healthier, better year for them next season. Maybe don't want to hear that, and we certainly have a full offseason to discuss it, but I think that's going to be the case. All right, I got a lot more questions to get to, including more about the offseason, coaching staff, and more. We'll discuss those next. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members, including myself, who's opening up the PrizePicks app right now and looking at Major League Baseball. You also have some NFL preseason stuff on there as well. If you are into that, you can click on Major League Baseball tab, though. Click Braves. You're going to see the numbers they have on there. Austin Riley, half home run. You can pick more on that. Matt Olson as well. Austin Riley, 8.5 hitter fantasy score. Grant Holmes, 5 pitcher strikeouts. All you do is you pick more or less on those player stat projections for 2 to 6 players and watch the winnings roll in. And you can win up to 100 times your money bet on as little as 4 picks. So you can turn $10 into 1,000. PrizePicks available in more than 30 states across the country, including Georgia and Alabama. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, let's jump back into the questions here. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to all these. If not, I'll try to answer them on social media or maybe do another short bonus podcast. Fraser Dale says, how will this year's results and lack of performance impact next year in the winter trades? And that's kind of already discussed that one. I think if they can show some fight here towards the end, it'll get some good momentum going into the offseason. But I think you do have to realistically look back and say, okay, do we need to make massive changes, or was this just a fluke year with a ton of injuries and a ton of regression, and do we just run it back next year? I think it's the latter is what they will do. Again, whether or not that's right or wrong, we can debate that in the offseason, but that's the way I feel things are going to go. Dustin Mounts, hopefully A stops the Braves reunions after this year. I don't want Jock, Pilar, Rosario, Duvall, Swanson, or old players back, maybe Freddie Freeman. But it's time to come back, but just doesn't want the old reunion thing anymore. I agree, and it's fine to bring these players back if they're going to be role players, but these aren't guys that you can count on for extended periods of time. Cavs Buckeyes, does Snit take the fall for this season? Should he? I've been annoyed by his pitching management and trademark unbothered attitude, but to me, the clear biggest issue with this team is woeful offensive performance, which of course is influenced by injuries. I don't think Snit takes the fall for the season. I don't think they're going to fire him. I think the only way that he is not back next year is if he doesn't want to come back. I think many people, and I think many people in the front office are going to look at this year and just say, it couldn't have gone more disastrous for us. Nobody could have predicted this number of injuries, this number of significant injuries, this number of regressions. Look, it's been a bad year, and I know fans don't want to hear that, but it has been. Nothing has gone right for this Braves team. Ninboss says, what are the chances we look back at the end of the season and wish we had sold at the deadline? If you make the postseason, I don't think you do at all, because anytime you got a chance to get into the postseason, you have to go for it. And I think they did the right thing. I didn't necessarily like the move that they made. I think they did the right thing in at least buying one piece, even if it wasn't the piece that maybe I was hoping for, and not selling. Like, you got to remember, Max Fried, maybe your biggest trade chip at that time, was, coming off an injury in the forearm area, which was probably going to reduce his price even as a rental. And you're probably still going to get a draft pick for him when he, I think ultimately signs somewhere else in the offseason. So I think it was the right move. And I don't think we're going to look back, even if this team misses the postseason, then yeah, you could certainly say, well, wish we would have tried to get something for some of these rental contracts, like an AJ Minter, who I believe was also injured at the time of the trade deadline or just recently coming back. Then, certainly. But if you make the postseason, again, anytime you got that chance, you want to go for it, and Max Fried and others give you that chance. Dustin Mounts, do you think AA is regretting taking all that dead money he did this past offseason, and how much do you think it cost the Braves improving more at the trade deadline? Well, they went out and made a money move at the deadline, even if it wasn't maybe as much as we thought. Look, you go back to the offseason, there weren't many holes to fill on this team. It was left field, unless you thought they were going to make an upgrade at shortstop. It was really just left field and starting rotation. And he went out and made two moves for the starting rotation that have saved this team, by the way, and Reynaldo Lopez and Chris Sale. And then he made a bunch of moves to get a cheap player going forward. It cost him a lot for this year, but a cheap player going forward in Jared Kelenic. And look, we can talk more about the Kelenic discussion and whether or not that maybe is a bit of a regret. But yeah, spending all that money, I would think, hurt them at the deadline, not having as much to move. But at that point, you probably didn't think it was going to take 3 or 4 moves at the trade deadline. You probably didn't think you were going to have to do that much, but it ended up with all the injuries. They really needed to make 3 or 4 moves at the deadline, and they just couldn't. They didn't have the resources to do that. Ballard3 says, Snit seems tired. Do you think he'd retire after this year or wait until the end of next year when his contract is up? I said when he signed that contract that I think he'll retire after that season, after the 2025 season. He'll be turning 70 that year. I'd maintain that that's still going to be the case. I know John Heyman has come out and said that. That's nothing insider information. That's him doing just like me and reading between the lines that contract's up. He's turning 70 that year. Been doing this for a while. I've always thought that's when he's going to walk away. Michael Lee Tunes, when do you think it's time to start wearing the powder blue uniforms from the early 80s again? It appears that's where we're at right now, is the early 80s. I don't know if that'll help or not, but I do like the powder blues. Large, Jake, how many times lately have you just wanted to turn off the game and say, forget this? Well, I've done it the past 2 games. I've turned off the TV or at least just put it on mute while I work at home. But there's been several of those games here lately. Ghost of 1995, how bad has this been to go before people start getting fired? I don't think anybody's getting fired. this year. As much as fans, want that to happen, I don't think anybody's getting fired from this. Jason, too many roster questions concerning next offseason to mention. Your thoughts on the Murphy trade, Soler trade, Kelnick trade, your starting catcher, platoon backup, your left field will be fourth outfielder next year, and a full-time DH will play left field next year, whether it's Soler or Ozuna. We're going to have a bigger discussion about the Murphy trade, the Soler trade. I get why getting Soler helps this offense. I will say that. It was not the move that I wanted, and I think it complicates matters going forward. The Kelnick trade, Kelnick to me has not proven enough this season to say that he is guaranteed a spot going forward. He has not done enough this year to say that for me. So I think there certainly are some questions. But again, we'll discuss the Murphy trade more in another podcast. E. Goldie, assuming Fried and Minter are gone and Morton retires, what would you love to see A do this offseason with that money? We're going to have a discussion about this too, because I think there's a real chance that the front office wants to get under the luxury tax threshold. And I'm not talking about the third tier. I'm talking about the first tier, because it doesn't matter what tier you go over. If you were over the luxury tax 3 years in a row, that penalty significantly increases. So we could be looking at an offseason where the Braves are looking to get under the luxury tax. Leland, Game 3 versus the Brewers was a disaster. No energy, nothing. Can the Braves turn this around? Yes, they certainly can. And also, is game attendance down? Not enough bobbleheads to fill the seats. It certainly was down on Thursday. Look, that was an early morning game. I think it was the first day of school. I know it was the first day of school here. But we'll see what attendance looks like the rest of the way if the team continues to play like this. Peterson, if the Braves are under the luxury tax this year, does that mean it resets for next year? They are not going to be under the luxury tax this year. Again, we're talking about them staying under the third threshold of the luxury tax. They are going to be over the luxury tax. It's going to be their second year in a row. If they do it again next year, they'll face much harsher penalties. Jared, how do I get paid $20 million a year to be absolutely horrible at my job? Talking about Charlie Morton. You got to have a really good curveball. And Charlie Morton still has that. He just has trouble locating it from time to time. JDK, Jake's take, is Kelnick still the long-term answer in left? No, I don't think he's proven enough this season for me to definitively say that. Ecuadorman, can we finally say the season is done? In my opinion, we need to punt and get ready for next season. Why? Well, I mean, what is the purpose of doing that other than to maybe tank and get a little bit better draft pick? I don't know why you would just give up on this season with 2 months to go, and you still can very easily get in the postseason with a good run. E. Goldie, do you feel this year has been more difficult to watch than years like 16 and 17? Yes, absolutely. Those years you knew you weren't going to be very good. This year you were expected, it's World Series or bust coming into the season, and then it's turned out to be this. So sorry, I have several more questions to get to. I may have to do another bonus episode here over the weekend to get to some more of these. But thank you so much for submitting your questions. Great discussions, obviously. Thanks for those that are here live with me. Sorry I haven't been able to get to you either. Brogglesby, Doug Ibley, Paul the Salty, The Golden Age, Todd Twiley, Protect PR, Derek in here as well, Doug Disciple. Thank you all for joining. Doc's Cards. See your question here, Doc. I'm not going to get to it, but I will answer it. We'll do another bonus episode getting to the rest of these questions. Thank you so much for joining me here live on the podcast. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. If you're new, hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you make Locked On MLB your second listen of the day with Sully over there doing a great job. And make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast. And we will talk to you next time.